All right, it's time to talk some hoops that time of week with Mike LaTulip. We got Braggin Rights coming up, which is always one of my favorite events of the year. Could be a little snowy, a little hairy on the way down or the way up. We'll find out with this big storm coming in. But Mike, what's up, man? This is always an interesting time of year in college basketball, but especially with Illinois, because this Braggin Rights game, it always means something.
It does. It's going to be interesting, right? A lot of transfers, a lot of freshmen. So when I was there and even previously, less movement. So that game year after year, there's history and this guy did this to this guy the previous year. And that's why I'm pretty fascinated to see what the intensity is like. I'm sure it's going to be packed. We'll see how the snow affects that and who all gets into the arena. But I love this game, man. It's one of my favorite ones of the year. Time and time again, it delivers. And I was a part of some good ones, man. Tracy hits the floater and layup to beat them. That was a good team with Jordan Clarkson and Jonathan Williams. And I think we lost 2012, 2013. We were undefeated, lost, and then my other 3 years we won. So that's kind of flipped. I mean, I think Illinois won last year, Mizzou won the
Three.
previous three.
Yeah.
Got to get back on the right side of that, man.
Javon Pickett.
Javon Pickett. He's gone now, though, right? He's slew.
Yeah.
Don't got to worry about him.
No, it's always fun. Like Ravonte Rice had the game winner, right? That was phenomenal. John did pretty well in that series. I want to get back to this, Mike, but let's first talk about the Alabama A&M victory, 68-47. On paper, that doesn't look so bad. For anybody who lived through it, it wasn't that great of an experience, right? Especially in the beginning of that second half. What happened for Illinois to allow an 18-2 run to start a half against one of the worst teams in Division I?
It was a perfect storm. It was definitely a perfect storm. I thought the shot selection was poor. A lot of early shots in the shot clock. I thought they worked to get better quality shots in the first half. And then once you extend that lead, I thought they kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit. And that, to me, that's leadership. I mean, some of those guys in that locker room have to say, hey, let's push this thing to 30. You know, let's blow this thing open. Let's do our work in the first 10 minutes to where we don't have to continue to scrap for the rest of the game like they did. And look, too, on top of that, let's call a spade a spade. Arguably, your best offensive player was out of the game for a big stretch of that offensive lull. And then you had a kind of a hodgepodge of lineups that you're having 2 to 3 guys on the floor where that end of the floor is not necessarily their strong suit. So as much as the defense at times probably was fine, they spacing and the lack of shooting, and I thought they shot too many threes. It was a perfect storm. And you could see how much the tide kind of flipped once Matthew Meyer came back in the game. Not only just offensively and getting out on the break, but contesting at the rim. He's been tremendous with that, and getting out on the break and getting downhill and stride stop, shot fake, floater. He's got such a vast repertoire offensively, and you could see that on full display because that game was over when he came back in.
Last 3 games, Mike, of Matthew Meyer, and of course this dates back to the Texas game, right? 8.7 points, 4 rebounds, 2 blocks, 1 steal, just 1.3 turnovers, shooting ridiculous, 64% from the field, 53% from 3. What's changed for Matthew Meyer?
He's a really, really good basketball player, man. And we know it can be a bit wild at times, but that can play to their advantage. That can be advantageous because when you have these lulls, you kind of need a guy that's just not thinking. You see some overthinking from guys at times. I think trying to figure it out with the 5 out and the structured randomness. And he's a guy that can just go. And he's settling into his role, a role I think we all envisioned for him, a role he probably envisioned for himself, being one of the top kind of go-to guys on this team. And look, he has high expectations for himself, and this staff has high expectations for him. And it's difficult when you're the grad transfer. I think everybody assumes just it's plug and play. But when you're used to certain, way things have been done for years and years in Waco, and same thing goes for Terrence down in Lubbock, and then now you shift, and Brad does things differently. He does shoot arounds are different, practice is different, terminology can be different, and there are elements when you go into a new situation where you kind of are a freshman in a sense. So I know we talk about a lot of the freshmen, but these guys have elements of freshmen to them as well, because there is so much that's new, and I think he's starting to get used to that. We've seen that rear its head in a myriad of ways, but the more they become comfortable with what takes place and what the standard is and what the culture is, the more that you're going to see this team take off, and he's a big part of that.
You mentioned overthinking. I'm going to imagine that goes with Coleman Hawkins, who had 5 turnovers and just really didn't look at the rim to shoot the ball. Brad Underwood got in his face a couple times about that. And then, listen, Terrence Shannon had a nice bounce back game with 18 points. I thought he could have gone for 30 if he would have been a little bit more aggressive. So what do you think they're going through right now, just when it comes to finding their spots?
Yeah, well, I'll start with Coleman. Definitely some overpassing. I don't worry as much about the turnovers. When you're a guy that has the ball in his hands as much as he does, turnovers are going to happen. What you don't want are the jailbreak ones. He had a couple of those in that Alabama A&M game. And look, with Coleman, it's not necessarily as simple as, he's overpassing, he needs to shoot more. In my opinion, he just needs to attack more, and not predetermine what he's going to do. He's smart enough to read the defense and say, hey, I'm going to be in attack mode. I'm going to get downhill. And instead of taking that one dribble and picking it up at the elbow to kind of stride stop over, like, let me see if I can get downhill. Let me Barkley, like they call it, right? Where you can turn, flip, back down a guy. Now you got eyes on you and you can just read the defense. He can get sped up at times. And then with Terrence, Terrence has a proclivity, if you will, to float at times offensively. You can kind of see him shuffling around, and I think he's starting to figure it out a little bit with some of these cuts. And I think that the iteration of the spread offense and what they're throwing in there will help him, because not only is it a lot of dribble handoff, it's a lot of get action where you're throwing it to Coleman and kind of getting a running start, going into a handoff, beating your guy to the handoff and getting downhill, putting pressure on the defense. And but defensively, Terrence can be one of the best defenders in the country, and he showed that a couple times. He had some of those Alabama A&M guys in hell when he was guarding them. And look, for a lot of these guys, and this is just college basketball in general, when you play teams that are lower level, mid-major, low major, you can't have this certain level and disposition to yourself defensively because you smell blood in the water, right? I'm going to get into a guy, I'm a pressure, I'm going to try to, steal the ball because I know I can. And then when you play these high majors, it's a little bit different, right? Like, ball pressure is ball pressure. You need it every time because it limits the straight line passes and straight line drives. And that's where Terrence has to continue to challenge himself. You saw him get out on the break and taking defense into offense like he does, and that's where he can continue to take that next step. Him just kind of floating around and disappearing at times like he does. He could do that at Texas Tech. There was a certain level of guys that could cover stuff up for him. He can't do that here. He's counted on too much to do that, and he's figuring that out. And I think his leadership, although certainly took a step back in the Penn State game, I did like some of the things that I saw from him in that Alabama A&M game. Look, we focus so much on that stretch where Alabama A&M climbed back into the game. There was a lot of good stuff that took place in that game.
No.
A lot of stuff that you could build on. And I don't want that to go overlooked because there were some good things. But for Coleman and Terrence, we talk about those two a lot because they're counted on tremendously. So I'll say that about those two guys, and they're going to continue to be big pieces moving forward.
Yeah, and RJ Melendez's injury certainly impacted this game, right? Because you're talking about the lineups Underwood had in there during that bad stretch. We're not really offense centric, and RJ was in there with the shoulder, felt like he couldn't shoot very well. Underwood said it was a bruise, but that played a role in that game.
Yeah, and look, RJ's, again, another important piece. We talked about that third to fourth guy on your team, when your third or fourth guy is really good, that ceiling goes even further. And for him, I thought he did a lot of really nice things, especially on the defensive end in that game. He came in late in the first, or I guess later than he usually does in the first half. But I think what you're seeing as these games go on is RJ, Terrence, Coleman, Matthew Meyer. You're going to have to ride those guys for extensive periods of time. Because when those four guys are on the court, that's the best version of this team. And then kind of plugging and playing whoever's got it going for that fifth spot. And maybe that's Luke Goody when he comes back. And maybe it's one of the freshmen, whoever has it going. So you can just tell that game changed dramatically when those four guys were back on the floor together. It just did. There's a certain amount of length, skill, ability to do it on both ends, because a lot of those guys possess that. And RJ certainly fits that bill. So he's had some injuries. He's had some foul trouble in some games. And I think he's settling down a little bit too, where he doesn't have to feel so kind of offensive driven, where it's like, hey, do I have it going? Do I not have it going? He's a big part of what they're doing, man. And that 4-man group is really going to determine how far this team goes. We can talk about the ancillary pieces and the other guys on this team, but those four guys need to be right and need to be in the game. So that's what I'm looking for moving forward, is how those four guys continue to push forward.
Okay, Mike, this is the second game in a row where our post-game press conference felt newsworthy. Some people might disagree and have voiced that disagreement. What did you make of Matthew Meyer's post-game presser? As a player, I'm interested in your take here.
Yeah, in the moment when you're scrolling through Twitter without context, it's a bit jarring. But I always think back to being in those locker rooms, and guys care, man. Like, guys care. These are, this is their futures, like you're talking about. For the staff, this is their livelihoods. And there's a certain amount of passion that's tied to that. And in the heat of battle, there's a lot of emotion. And at times it can be hard to compartmentalize that. We had a rule when I was in Illinois: you don't tweet an hour and a half before the game, and you don't tweet an hour and a half after the game, because there's too much emotion. It's hard to separate that. And Matt was clearly upset. And when you bring that to the podium, what ends up happening is it can be taken as this all-encompassing thing. His body language at the podium, that must be how everyone feels. Now, Terrence had an interesting comment after he made his comments, but then Terrence at the end was like, hey, why is this sad press conference?
Yeah.
I think guys, then guys coming out afterwards and saying, because look, like I said, I've been in those locker rooms, and the heat of the battle right after the games, things are so amplified. And then you got to go and talk about it. And, it's amazing when you wake up the next morning how minuscule some of those things are. And you just move on. And while it can be headlines elsewhere and guys are talking about it and we're chatting about it, that's 3 days ago for them. Yeah. And they're moving on. And I think, look, if all the stuff that went on in the locker rooms that I was a part of, if those came out, I think this team, there's a certain element and a certain amount of things that should always stay in house. Always. This team has a propensity to let things seep out a little bit more.
Yes.
But the things that, most times what's going on in a locker room for a lot of teams, it's going on in a lot of places. I'd say most places.
Well, I'll just take you back. Like last year? 2 years ago with Wisconsin? When all that stuff was happening.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
That didn't leak out. And that sounded really bad. Like I know you've been a part of some locker rooms that probably weren't all that great, right? That's why, but it's rare that it comes out, right? Like it's pretty rare because you guys are coached on it. Your coaches tell you like, hey, keep this stuff in here. Yeah, but we've now heard Underwood go off on his team in a press conference. Coleman says some interesting things at times, including this week. And none of it's wrong, but and then Matthew talked about some disagreement with his head coach. I think all that stuff is notable because we normally don't see it. It doesn't mean I'm giving up on this team or I think this team's a train or anything, because this happens in every team. And I think every year Brad Underwood's been the coach around this time of year, there's always like, I don't want to say a crossroads, Mike, but it's like all right, we got to figure this stuff out. And they usually do. Right. So I feel like this team right now is probably just figuring some stuff out.
Yeah, and it's personalities too, man. Like team by team. I mean, think about when I was at Illinois, just no different than any other locker room in college basketball. There was a ton of stuff that went on. Things that were said, guys getting kicked out of practice, all over the place. But, the two guys that you would probably talk to in the media the most were Malcolm Hill and Kendrick Nunn. Kendrick, it was tough to get 2-3 words out of him because, he's just going to kind of finish the media and move on. That's just what he did. And Malcolm was another guy that just kind of hit singles and was never going to say anything outlandish. That just wasn't really who he was. And
Malcolm,
look, I think he just had.
Yeah, Malcolm was chill. Malcolm was, for us, one of our favorite guys to talk to, because he was like always grateful for it. He was always nice to but he always said some stuff, but it was always what the team wanted him to say, right? Like I don't think they ever had to worry much about Malcolm going to the media.
Yeah, and I'll touch on Coleman's comments too, and this is just my own personal opinion, because people were talking about the Coleman thing, and then I went back and watched it, and when you listen to it, you're like, whoa, but I think what he meant to say when he talked about, hey, coach yells at us, and I just tell the freshmen to not listen to it. And I truly believe what Coleman meant was just and it's a great lesson for, a lot of college basketball players, because a lot of college coaches are loud, right? Get on you. That's their way of teaching. And it's separating the delivery and the message. Right. And I think what Coleman meant was hey, just brush it right off your shoulder the way that it's being said to you, but take the message. Right. That's what you ultimately have to do. And I had teammates in the past that didn't do too well with that. I had teammates that, Kendrick Nunn was just, you could say anything to him, nods his head and goes to work. Even I struggled with that. I took it personally, and you internalize it, and that's what you do when you're young, right? Because as much as we view these guys as he's a junior, he's a senior, 21 years old. I know they're old in the context of what a college student is, but they're still young in terms of going through things in life and how you deal with that stuff. And it's hard, man. It's really hard. And then not only that, you go from that to talking to people and having to articulate that. And Coleman is no doubt more outspoken than probably most players that I've seen. And I think, for the most part, you just got to look at it and be like, hey, these aren't big issues. These aren't issues that are different than any college basketball locker room. And time will tell, right? Time will tell with this team. You could look back at it in a month and be like, hey, remember that Alabama A&M stuff?
Yeah. I don't know if it's a big thing. I don't think it's a nothing. I think it's it's a something. I don't know what it means. It's probably just more public than.
Yeah, no, it's more public. I that's what I meant. That's what I said. This always seeps in a little bit more, it seems, over the past few years with a couple of these guys. But you mentioned the crossroads. No, I don't think this team's at a crossroads. I think this is a team that's realizing that despite early success, despite expectations, there are still steps that can't be skipped when it comes to a new group. And that's what's hard, right? You beat Texas, you beat UCLA, and you have this expectation as a team, you have this expectation as a group, and then you lose to Penn State, and it's like the sky's falling. And guys have a hard time dealing with that. And honestly, it's weird because I remember being in those arenas for the game. It's different in the arena than it is watching it.
Yeah.
I watched it and I was like, yeah, they're going to win this game. They're going to beat Alabama A&M. There was never a point in time where I thought they were going to lose that game. But I remember being in those games when I was there And it feels different in that arena. There's this weird like tension. It's palpable. Like,
I
oh
texted
my
you
God.
before Matthew Meyer checked in. I was like, I don't know. This one feels like it's a
Yeah.
little.
And meanwhile, I was sitting at home watching it on BTN, and I was like, yeah, this. I don't care. Alabama A&M go on a 20-0 run. They're not losing this game because Meyer was out. It was an interesting lineup. We could talk about it for days, but I I don't think this team is realizing right now what it takes to have success with a new group.
Yeah.
And that comes with growing pains. And I think you're seeing those right now, and I think they're going to be better for it.
Yeah, I still think they're really good. And hey, they're all that stuff, and they're the second highest ranked team in the Big Ten in the AP Top
And
25.
I think they're also, are they still the only team in America with 2 top 10 KenPom wins?
I believe so. Yeah. So we know they're good.
Yeah. I mean, early on, it's what, you're 8-3 right
Mhm.
now. I mean, I think we expected 7-4, 8-3.
Yeah.
I think in a way they're ahead of schedule.
That said, Mike, I think this is a hugely important game for this
Yeah.
team. Because Missouri, what are they, 11-1 here? But like soft schedule,
Very.
buzzer beater against UCF. Got crushed by Kansas, their top opponent. Do have 2 top 100 KenPom wins, but they played nothing like Illinois. They struggled defensively. Some of their players they added who they expected to be good, Isaiah Mosley, and some of these guys have been hurt and not making an impact. But still, this is a toughness game, right? Like this is another
Yeah.
one of those that Missouri's coming for this. Like, again, all these transfers, new players. Maybe they don't know what this means, but I think this is an important game. What do you think, and what do you think of the matchup?
Yeah, I think it's similar to that Penn State game. Not only is the Braggin Rights game a toughness game, so are those 11 a.m. games. Like there's certain games where it's just throw out everything else. You got to play your butt off. And this Missouri team in particular, yeah, their schedule's been atrocious. Um, but what they do have is, to a degree, what's hurt this Illinois team this year, and it's a bit undersized team, right? They don't have some sort of lumbering big. They play guys at the 5 that can step out and do different things, and they shoot it pretty well. And then on top of that, they got some dogs. Like they got Dennis Gates brought in a few guys that I've watched a lot of because I watched Wright State as well. And these are guys that came from the Horizon League. DeAndre Golston's a really good player. He was first team all Horizon League. Demoy Hodge, Trey Gomillion also came from Cleveland State with Dennis Gates, and those guys were back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year in the Horizon League. So that guys that play hard and play desperate. And if you don't want to bring that in this game, I don't care that it's the Bragging Rights game. Just look at this Missouri team in general. Like this is a team that can beat you.
Mm-hmm.
What Kansas did was say, hey, we're going to be the aggressor. We don't care that it's at your place. We're going to spread you out. We're going to make you guard. We're going to move the ball from side to side, get downhill. And just like Kansas did against Indiana in their next game, they played with just a certain amount of aggression and physicality. And that's what this team can do. Like Terrence is a physical guy, right? I think Matthew Meyer, when he wants to be, can be a physical guy. And Coleman, same thing. Like you got to take it to these guys, because I don't know what this game's going to mean in terms of like the history of it. We did a lot of stuff with that the week leading up to it, and who knows? It's going to mean different things to different guys. But throw it all out. You have to play hard, man. Like this team plays with pace. They're up and down, but this is going to be really their second, maybe third test of the year with UCF and Kansas being really the only 2 teams that were within like the top 200 of KenPom. So throw it all out, man. You got to play hard and play tough in this game, in this environment.
All right. What Zachary Perrine, Illinois just announced, is joining the team at semester. 6'10", 220-pound forward from France, of course. Spent Sunrise Christian Academy, only practiced there, wasn't playing. Brad said, we're excited to have Zach arrive on campus, begin his academic and athletic career at the University of Illinois. He's remained loyal to us throughout the recruiting process, eager to be officially be an Illini. Joining a team mid-season is certainly a unique situation, but Zach is a driven, committed young man who takes school and basketball seriously. Our coaches and support staff, we tell us our players are here to welcome him and offer support through this transition. My expectations wouldn't be high on him joining the rotation. right? Like there's a freshman, big man. You got Dane and Coleman Hawkins. Maybe he gets some spot minutes here every once in a while, just in a big body. But certainly an intriguing long-term prospect, Mike. So what do you make him joining now?
So is he eligible to play?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think if there's a guy that potentially surprises you as a midseason eligible guy, it's a guy with his measurables and his IQ. I would not expect. I should say I'd be shocked if he's all of a sudden getting real minutes. But who knows? I mean, he's a guy where you throw him into the game and maybe it's against Bethune-Cookman or what, or I guess so is he eligible now?
They said we'll join the program immediately. So we got to get some follow-ups. Brad Underwood is about to meet the media here.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect much, but for him to get in at semester, I think is important because one, you see just how things work and how it works mid-season and what that locker room's like mid-season, how it functions, and
Seemed like it was great
anytime.
for Dane.
Yeah, for sure. No, and again, like this is, I think just like Dane had a lot of benefited greatly from playing against Kofi every day in practice. I think Zachary Prin can benefit from playing against guys like Coleman and Dane, and it's only going to help him. So whether or not he helps his team in the immediate future, who knows? Would be shocked if he did, but anytime you can add a piece like that, I don't care when it is, it benefits your program.
Mike LaTulip, you're the goods, man. Appreciate the time as always.
Appreciate it.